Welcome to Sabs podcast. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. My special guest tonight is Lee Camp. He's a comedian and he's the host of Dangerous Ideas with Lee Camp. Welcome back, Lee.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it, Sabby.
So it was great to actually see you in person in DC. For those who are not aware, when I went to DC last time, there was a Peace in Ukraine rally and Lee was actually one of the speakers, but it was great to actually see you in person.
Yeah, that was a fun event. I don't know how I ended up on that stage with two presidential candidates and a former vice presidential candidate, but I'll take it.
All right. So, Lee, obviously, I know you've been paying attention to this war with Israel and Gaza. I think the first thing that I want to ask you about, there seems to be the use of the term anti-Semitism now, ever since this war started, it seems to kind of just be loosely thrown around. So I want to get your perspective about that, because some people are saying that supporting the Palestinians' self-determination in itself is anti-Semitic. When I push back on that, I always inform people that, well, technically Palestinians are Semites, right? And I'm surprised more people don't use that in reference to pushback. But how would you define it, and how do you feel it's being used today?
Yeah, so the reason we've heard anti-Semitism thrown around a lot recently is by design. It's not just an accident. It is the only way you can justify an apartheid state, an apartheid oppressive state like Israel. The truth is that anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. I am an anti-Zionist Jew. And guess what? We exist, and we exist in the millions around this world. And in fact, Zionism does not equal Judaism, and there are more Zionists, this is just a cold fact, more Zionist Christians in America than there are Jews in the world. Some of the biggest supporters of Zionism, the state of Israel, are Christians, many of them evangelical Christians, who believe that all Jews need to be in Israel for the end times to come about. And so that's why they support Israel. But of course, when the end times come about, they believe all Jews will burn in hell. So the biggest supporters of Zionism around the world are Christians who want to see Jews burn in hell. Now, they don't mention that part. They just donate tons of money to Israel and support it in various propagandistic ways. But that is really what it comes down to. And so anti-Zionism does not equal anti-Semitism. But Israel, the propaganda that they put out, the propaganda that the U.S. puts out, they want you to believe that because they don't want you to actually look into this issue, actually analyze it with a moral core that will tell you that this is genocide. And this is actually the dictionary definition of genocide. I looked it up the other day, and they're going. So this is published on the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust website of what is genocide. So this is the Holocaust Memorial site. And they're going off the UN's definition and talking about the genocide conventions from the UN. And just tell me if any of these sound familiar. The definition is any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. 1, killing members of the group. 2, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. 3, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. 4, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. And 5, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. Israel fits every one of those bullet points. The only one that's even arguable is transferring children, but they've kidnapped 10,000 Palestinians and put them in prisons largely without a trial or charges, many of them, and most of them, or a lot of them, are children. So I'd say that counts as transfer. But even if you didn't have that one, you're still fitting most of all of the requirements. Any one of those requirements is genocide. So Israel is just down the book from the Holocaust Memorial website committing genocide in Gaza right now. And that is not an anti-Semitic view to believe that.
Well said, Lee. I was actually at a talk recently where Miko Palid was the guest speaker. This was at MIT. And Miko said that people have to understand that organizations like AIPAC, for example, that these organizations are very powerful. He said they're strategic. He also said like they have like an entire PR campaign. I mean, look at the way that they came after Rashida Tlaib, right? When she was just asking for some type of, sympathy and for them to call for like a ceasefire for the Palestinian people and for them to at least even consider the Palestinian people as human beings in the first place, right? Look at how they heavily came after her to smear her. They did the same thing with Jamal Bowman. They're doing the same thing with Thomas Massey. And it's like all of a sudden, all of these different accounts on Twitter, which I had never seen before, they all just swarm in to attack anyone who's willing to push for the Palestinian people. So that's another thing. I've noticed a lot of these politicians, they're actually bought and owned by groups like AIPAC, like Richie Torres, for example.
Yeah, and you can go to Open Secrets and see how much these politicians are funded by. There's actually a list of 6 or 7 different Israel PACs and groups, pro-Israel PACs. Now, these should be considered foreign agent groups because they are agents of a foreign government, but they're not. They're not registered under foreign agency. No one talks about them that way because Israel and the United States are really one entity. It's all part of the U.S. empire. But that aside, in terms of the amount spent, you can go to Open Secrets. You can find out how much they're spending on these candidates. And if you look at the top senator or former senator who's received money from what we can just group them all together as the Israel lobby, who's received money from the Israel lobby, guess what? It's Genocide Joe Biden, number 1 out of all senators and former senators in receiving Israel PAC money. Number 3 is Hillary Clinton. And then you go to the House and, high up on the list is Nancy Pelosi, Hakeem Jeffries, Mitch McConnell is also very high on these lists. And so it's both sides. They're funding heavily. But what people also don't seem to talk about as much is how they will, you did mention Rashida Tlaib, how they will go after those who are not supporting them by supporting their opposers or supporting those who can bring them down. They offered, I forget, I lost his name, but he's running for Congress in Michigan, and he put up a Twitter video saying that he was offered $20 million to run against Rashida Tlaib. He's a businessman, and that's the now you can't donate $20 million to a campaign, so it's really closer to a bribe. But the amount of money they'll dump to try and get people out of Congress who do not, quote unquote, support Israel, which at this moment is supporting genocide, is unbelievable. And instead, people mostly focus on who receives donations from them. But I think equally important is how much they spend to keep people out of Congress.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And especially for those of you who are not on Twitter, there was actually a gentleman that I've seen on independent media for quite some time to give the Palestinian perspective coming out of Gaza. And that was Professor Rifat. He was actually killed the other day. And Barry Weiss, I feel, is another one of those people that is just heavily a part of that propaganda machine. So I want to share this here. Z Squirrel tweeted this. Recently, Barry Weiss put a kill target on Rifat Al-Arir, a Palestinian writer and reporter in Gaza, for daring to joke about the baby in oven hoax. The Israeli regime, whose members follow her every word, have now killed him. Barry Weiss killed Rifat Al-Arir. And it shows this tweet here where Barry Weiss said, here is Rifat joking about whether or not an Israeli baby burned alive in an oven was cooked with or without baking powder. And this was the tweet from Rifat. He said, with or without baking powder, ? And he was responding to this tweet from Divad, which said a baby found in an oven, baked to death by Hamas terrorists, et cetera, et cetera. Well, Barry Weiss actually had a speaking engagement earlier today in Texas, and it says that students at the University of Texas protested against Barry Weiss during her lecture at the university because of this. And this is a very short clip here that I want to play. So that was the event that Barry Weiss was speaking at. So there were protesters there to greet her because of her involvement in this situation. And I want to get your perspective about this. How do you feel about journalists like Barry Weiss? At one point, she used to work for the New York Times. She left the New York Times because she had criticism, I guess, over their control of the type of work that she wanted to publish. She then became a part of the Twitter files at one point briefly, but didn't stay through the entire process. How do you feel about that? And how do you feel about the protest?
Yeah, so let's break this down before I get to the Barry Weiss part of it. So Dr. Rafat Al-Arir, I don't know him well, but many of the people that you and I interact with have had interviews with him over the years. Max Blumenthal and many others of those at Electronic Intifada, and he was a good friend of them, Dan Cohen, and he was a good friend of them. He would bring people to Gaza, show them Gaza, help make sure they're taken care of while they're there and find housing and things like that, and speak about Gaza, and really devoted his life to getting the word out about the open air prison that is Gaza, even before October 7th. And what Israel's doing here, before we get to the Barry Weiss aspect of it, what Israel's doing here is they're fighting Hamas on one level, but a lot of what they're doing is trying to destroy the entire society of Gaza, the culture, the people, the babies, the hospital system, because they want disease to do maybe even more than bombs are doing right now. So they destroyed the health system. They are trying to gut the entire cultural understanding of Gaza. They're getting rid of the leaders, and that includes academic leaders, cultural leaders, poets. And so this professor was an important cultural leader, an important speaker in so many ways. And so they had it out for him, aside from the Barry Weiss thing. And they are going after other people like him who are well-known academics who can speak very clearly often in English about what Gaza is, about the oppression, about the harm that has been done for generations. And so that is the goal of Israel. That is the goal of the IDF, along with journalists and medics and so many others. So I don't know that they wouldn't have killed him. I mean, they've already killed more journalists than were killed in Vietnam in 2 months. So I don't know that they wouldn't have killed him ultimately anyway. But that being said, Barry Weiss, I mean, even before this, I viewed her as a piece of garbage. I mean, she worked at New York Times for years doing Zionist propaganda for them. She left in a stew a few years ago, but she called, if anyone wants to have a little fun, look up the clip of her with Joe Rogan where she doesn't know what the word toady means, even though she used it. But anyway, I have no respect for her or anything. To break down that tweet you read, the reason he was mocking that babies in ovens thing is because it's laughable. It's propaganda. It is absolutely ridiculous that Hamas, in their effort to run into Israel, grab hostages, and get out, had the time to bake babies. It's so nonsense. And so some people were putting that out. There's been no evidence to it. The babies that were burned or killed have obviously been killed by IDF tanks that killed basically everyone in the area, because it's a well-known directive in Israel called the Hannibal Directive, where when someone's taken hostage, they just kill everyone, the hostage, the people around it, everyone. And so if any babies were killed, that's how they were killed. So that's why he was mocking it. So he responds to a tweet about babies in ovens by saying, did they add baking powder, mocking the stupidity of the propaganda. She then highlights this because she is well known, has a big following, and is well known in Israel circles as well. They quickly latch onto it. And he actually, I think you didn't read this one, he actually tweeted, if I'm killed, it will be because of Barry Weiss, and I think he said her ilk, meaning others like her, who have gone after him for basically speaking the truth about Gaza. And sure enough, after she did that, after she highlighted him, he was assassinated. I haven't verified this, but I heard that he was sheltering with a large group of people, like in a school or something. And he was told, I think via phone call or something, that the IDF was going to kill him or was gunning him for him, and he chose to leave so that they wouldn't bomb an entire group of 100 people or whatever number it was. And sure enough, they then killed him and his sister and their kids. But to me, the Barry Weiss thing is a side story of this is Israel trying to eliminate the culture and the people and the history and the leaders of Gaza that have nothing to do with Hamas or the military wing of Hamas. And that is genocide. It's ethnic cleansing. Absolutely.
There's another thing, too, in reference to the protests. I'm not sure if you follow this person, but Bill Ackman, he's a billionaire. He's one of the donors of RFK Jr.'s campaign. He was the one that strategically, he wrote the letter to Harvard University and said he did not agree with the letter that the students actually released saying that this was Israel's fault after October 7th. He heavily contacted Harvard, also continue to get a lot of traction on Twitter. This is another person that's also close with Elon Musk. This is that billionaire bros club. But he is now basically celebrating because one of the presidents, I believe it's the president at the University of Pennsylvania, it looks like she is going to step down. So he continued to hammer this on, particularly in social media circles, et cetera, using the power and the platform that he has to make sure that these university presidents at Harvard University, also at Columbia and UPenn, that they are held accountable for the protests that the students have held on campus. He is also saying that they are pro-Hamas protesters, and he's saying that their rhetoric is also anti-Semitic. And I want to get your take on that and this idea that a billionaire can just come in and start making these kinds of demands.
Well, that's the beauty of our oligarchy, isn't it? I mean, billionaires control the system in some, and when they call up and say, when they call up and say that they want things done, a lot of times it happens. I haven't been paying much attention to that back and forth, although it sounds like the same, you can't criticize Israel without being anti-Semitic garbage. And that's why I think those of us who are anti-Zionist Jews like myself, need to speak up so much. And Jewish Voice for Peace has been doing amazing work, amazing protests. There are groups, so there are rabbinical statements aligned with Jewish Voice for Peace talking about how this is utterly repulsive, what Israel's doing right now. And no, it's not anti-Semitic to say that this is horrific. It's a genocide. They've killed more innocent civilians than in these 2 months than have been killed so far in the entire proxy war in Ukraine. Just insanely horrific. One thing you mentioned is that this is one of the biggest donors to RFK Jr. Now, he's an interesting case. RFK Jr. says a lot of things I agree with, and in certain areas, he's one of the only ones you see saying it, and yet is so breathtakingly atrocious on Israel that whatever good he might be doing, it just destroys it all. It sets fire to anything else he says, because he will spout, and this is pre-October 7th that we were watching. I was watching these clips and I was commenting on this. So this doesn't even have to do with October 7th. This is pre that. He was just making up garbage about Palestinians, saying, oh, they're paid to kill any Jew in the world, and just crazy stuff. And it maligns, it just takes everything he says, and you're like, oh, this guy will just repeat anything that's nonsense, apparently. I don't know if it has to do with, I can't say as to whether it has to do with his funding or not, but I will say that he is so breathtakingly wrong on it that it takes everything else that comes out of his mouth, and you're just like, maybe he's making up that too. I don't know. He made up this trash about Israel and Palestine, so who knows?
And he seems to refuse to have a conversation with anyone that has the opposite view. I've noticed that as well. Well, earlier today, this is the breaking news in reference to Israel and Gaza today. For those who have not seen, this is from the UN News. It says, breaking: United States vetoes Security Council draft resolution that would have demanded an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza, an immediate and unconditional release of all the hostages. Now, here's the thing about this vote. 13 countries supported the ceasefire. The United States was the only country that voted against it. The UK chose to abstain, as if that really means anything. I feel like that was just cowardly as well. But the US, the United States voted against it. What's interesting here, this gentleman right here, he's the representative for the US. I don't understand where he came from, because I could have sworn last time they had a meeting at the UN, I thought it was a woman who was representing the United States. So I don't know where this guy came from, but he's the one with his hand raised. So of course he chose to abstain. But I want to get your take on this, because this pretty much debunks the statement that has come from the US government, particularly the Biden administration, that the United States said it's very important that we get the rest of the hostages out. If this resolution would have passed, that would have been able to happen. But it was the US that chose to prevent that from happening. So for people who don't understand, this isn't one of those situations where it's a majority approval. Even though the majority of the countries approved it, that's not how it works. So because the US voted against it, that actually stopped this from moving forward. But I want to get your take on this issue about the hostages, how much Biden said it's really important that we get the rest of the hostages out. The United States just blocked that chance of that happening.
Yeah, they absolutely did. They don't want the hostages. I mean, Israel does not want the hostages. They want to eliminate Gaza and eliminate Palestinians. And we saw that from the months, 2 months or whatever of bombing until they actually stopped long enough to allow hostages out. We saw it also on October 7th, when it's possible that half or more of the deaths on October 7th is from the IDF just bombing and obliterating even any building that had hostages in it. But in terms of the U.S. vote, they voted against it, and yet it is the polar opposite of, like you're saying, Biden saying he wants the hostages out, Biden saying that they've been pressing Israel to take care of for civilians, and they may say certain things. They may even say certain things to Israel, but at the same time, they're shipping them bombs. Even the Wall Street Journal said they shipped them the U.S. has shipped 15,000 bombs to Israel just since October 7th. So they're shipping them bombs and saying, we don't want you to use these. It's ridiculous. It's utterly ridiculous. And I know all your viewers are going to find this shocking. Let me see if I can phrase this correctly. They're lying to you. They're lying to everyone. I know that's going to shock everybody. I really do. But just today, the spokesperson for the National Security Council, John Kirby, said up there's a clip of him circulating where he said, name one other country that's working so hard to protect civilians in Gaza. What are you talking about? Literally, the U.S. is the one country voting to continue the bombing. It's unbelievable, the lies they will tell. It is catch-22 and 1984 wrapped into one, and then someone wiped their ass with it. It is ridiculous. They're not protecting any civilians. Literally, we're sending bombs to Israel, and some of the bombs that don't end up exploding, you can actually see the label. There are photos of the label saying things like Woodward, which is a Texas-based military contractor. These bombs raining down on Gaza are American. There is blood all over the hands of these people.
That's right. And before that vote happened, Netanyahu actually sent out a message before that. This is from Dr. Anastasia. Netanyahu declares that the ICC, an anti-Semitic organization for investigating Zionist regime war crimes. You guys got to hear what Netanyahu said here. This is crazy.
When the ICC investigates Israel for fake war crimes, this is pure anti-Semitism. The court established to prevent atrocities like the Nazi Holocaust against the Jewish people is now targeting the one state of the Jewish people. First, it outrageously claims that when Jews live in our homeland, this is a war crime. Second, it claims that When democratic Israel defends itself against terrorists who murder our children, rocket our cities, we're committing another war crime. Yet the ICC refuses to investigate brutal dictatorships like Iran and Syria, who commit horrific atrocities almost daily. As Prime Minister of Israel, I assure you, we will fight this perversion of justice with all our might. When the ICC...
So there he is there saying that the simple fact that they even wanted to investigate the state of Israel, he's referring to that as being anti-Semitic.
It's all they have. They are committing genocide that's being live streamed to the world. And all they have is you're anti-Semitic. It's all they can say. I mean, like I just mentioned, he brought up the Holocaust because they bring it up every 8 seconds. And yet this is textbook, by the definition, genocide, ethnic cleansing. And, you know, this is a guy who days before October 7th stood in front of the UN and held up a map. And you can look up photos of it right now. You can Google photos of it right now. Held up a map of the Middle East with Palestine eliminated, with West Bank gone, with Gaza gone, and it just said Israel over it. Proudly held that up days before October 7th. And so you know that is their goal. In fact, Netanyahu, behind closed doors, has been shopping to various countries that he needs the approval or the money or mainly the approval of. The idea that all of the Gazans will be pushed into Egypt or other countries, will live in tent cities in the desert, and Gaza will be given over to Israel. That his goal, like behind closed doors, is full-on ethnic cleansing of that entire area. And it's not even a secret. Like I said, he held up a map in front of the UN days before. This is their goal. And as the New York Times reported, and many other outlets, but you know, if you really want to know that this has breached even into the liberal media, the New York Times reported Israel knew that about the Hamas attack for at least a year. And the planning, there were many soldiers who saw the Hamas activity beforehand. Now, why would they know about it and yet do nothing? The soldiers on the lower levels who reported it were kind of shocked. Nothing changed. Nothing happened. Well, the reason is because they wanted this to happen. Now, I don't know that they knew the scope of it. Maybe they didn't. Also, all the cameras, as Mint Press reporting, all the cameras on the border walls were turned off or broken or something on October 7th. Now, I don't know if they knew the scope of it, but they knew it was about to happen, and they allowed it to happen. Now, why would they do that? Because in their minds, that justifies the full-on ethnic cleansing of Gaza, which is what they've wanted for years now. And so they built this up and allowed it to happen, and they think this justifies everything they do. But even if you wanted to believe the worst-case scenario of Hamas, that they just came in and rather than taking hostages, they just shot babies and raped and stuff, all of which has no evidence so far. But let's just say that's what they did. Let's say they did all of it. It still makes bombing hospitals a war crime. Still, everything Israel's doing are war crimes. Bombing schools, killing more UN workers than any other conflict. It's still a war crime. Shutting off the water, shutting off the electricity, mass punishment of the population, killing children. All of those are war crimes, even if you want to believe every last propaganda bullshit about Hamas. Still war crimes.
Well said there, Lee. Another thing I was wondering too, how do you feel about the protests in general? Because I feel like seeing thousands and thousands of people out in the streets, the fact that the protests are still continuing, there's a massive one in New York City right now. That tells me, like, especially the younger generation, they're not willing to let this go. There are more people that have been protesting in reference to support of the Palestinian people than there were during the George Floyd protests. Like, this is happening all across the globe. I really believe that it has been that energy that has even put some type of pressure on mainstream media, because for a while they weren't even talking about the Palestinian side of things. They were just talking about, you know, the Israeli side. And now they're confronted with these things. There was a CNN producer who recently announced that he lost 9 family members in Gaza. So CNN obviously had to report on that. So I think that the protests have been a tremendous help in reference to getting the other side of the story out, even just a little bit.
Yeah, I think you're right. The mainstream media, even though they still put out loads of propaganda, they have been forced to cover the reality of Gaza to some degree, even to the point that there's that viral clip of Wolf Blitzer, Mr. AIPAC. He came from AIPAC before he went to CNN, asking an IDF spokesperson, "Wait, so you knew there were innocent civilians in that refugee camp and you decided to bomb it anyway?" Kind of incredulously, like, is that how this works? And it's kind of amazing coming from Mr. AIPAC, who has done nothing but manufacture consent for Israel's apartheid state for generations. He's been alive forever. But you're absolutely right that it is the people in the street. It is the protests. It is those protests on at schools, at people's places of work. So much so that, and this is also unheard of, that there's a light mutiny going on in the State Department, in the White House. You have a mass, dozens of people, interns at the White House staff, signing a letter demanding Biden fight for a ceasefire. You have various people quitting at the State Department. And these are people, the thing is, you and I may go, well, of course you quit. But these are people who devoted their lives to U.S. empire war games. And even they are like, this is getting crazy. Like, it's waking a lot of people up, which I guess is the positive of this freaking horror show. But it is great to see so many people protesting, standing up. The 200, 300,000 that were in D.C. a couple of weeks ago. I was down there for that. It was pretty crazy, the number of people there. And then, the pro-apartheid genocide rally that happened a week later or 2 weeks later or whatever it was, they had fewer people, and they were paying a lot of their people. There were ads for college kids, go to this protest, we'll give you $250, which I don't know about you, but when I was in college, I would have, run over my mother with a car for $250. So.
Yeah, I know. It was like college students, we didn't have much money. So yeah, I was like, oh, great, that would be awesome. But that is another thing. They've also been paying people to tweet out things on social media too. That's also been announced from another Twitter user. They said that they tried to get her to be involved in this as well. It's all coming out. I feel like the propaganda is starting to fall apart.
$5,000 for influencers, quote unquote, to say they support Israel. Just a crazy amount of money.
Well said. Now, what do you think about in reference to where this leaves Joe Biden? Because they have reported this as well on mainstream media, that Joe Biden's approval rating is continuing to decrease, but particularly before it was over the economy, but now it's over this conflict with Israel and Gaza. And they said this is the first time they've seen this in a long time, where foreign policy may prevent someone from becoming reelected. Do you think that people are really going to show up to vote for other options? Like, obviously Cornel West and Jill Stein have the correct position when it comes to Israel and Gaza, or do you think a lot of people are going to stay home?
Yeah, I mean, you probably see a lot of people staying home in certain ways, but I mean, the part of the problem is it is amazing that it's hurting Joe Biden, because people haven't cared about, other people being bombed by our allies that much. So even just that is amazing. But the problem is, for people that say, oh, well, this is a red line for me. I excused everything Joe Biden did, but this is a red line for me. Well, if you're voting for the other corporate candidate, whether it be Donald Trump or one of the other lunatics, they're all they couldn't be more pro-apartheid, pro-genocide. So in terms of the two corporate bullshit parties, you're not going to find any alternative to this situation. Now, outside of that, it is pretty awesome that we have three candidates that are aggressively correct on this issue. Cornel West, Jill Stein, and Claudia De La Cruz, all very good on this issue. And that's exciting to see. Even if the way our system is aggressively rigged, they can't win. It's an important change, important shift I mean, if this world's going to change, it's going to change by a revolution of the mind, not a revolution of the amount of money spent on a political candidate.
Well said. How do you feel about this issue that Israel is also bombing Lebanon and Syria? This is a piece I feel that isn't mentioned often, especially in mainstream media. They're not talking about that at all. They're just talking about Israel and Gaza. But people need to hear about that as well. Like, Hamas is not in Lebanon. Hamas is not in Syria, but they're bombing those countries as well.
Yeah, and there are people who understand this issue far better than me. And from what I've heard from them, yes, Israel is attacking them a little bit, but the fact that Israel is withholding so much, meaning there's no full-on attack on Hezbollah. There's these light little pinpricks things basically saying, leave us alone. People are, I think, correctly pointing out that Israel doesn't have the might, unless they're going to use nuclear weapons and just nuke the whole region. They don't really have the might, actually, to full-on go up against Hezbollah. Hezbollah is a powerful military, and there is a big shift going on. And if the Arab nations choose to actually get involved and defend the Palestinians from this genocide, it's going to be a crazy shift in the world we know. It also speaks to the weakening of the U.S. empire. But of course, I don't want to see an all-out war in the region. I don't want to see endless numbers of civilians being bombed on any side. Most Israelis may be wrong on this issue, but I don't hold a people responsible for what their idiot governments do. Just like I didn't want someone to say, I am Donald Trump. So, these, to get a little deeper in it, these garbage decisions being made by far right-wing, lunatic, sociopath, nation state rulers, they don't represent really like 90% of all of us in these countries. And wouldn't it be great if one day we could realize that and unite outside of this awful propaganda?
Well, Vladimir Putin actually just had a meeting in the Middle East, and he's meeting with different Arab leaders. He met with the Prince of Saudi Arabia. He's also met with the leader of Iran as well. And some are saying, I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, but some are saying that one of the things that's being discussed is how to deal with what's happening to the Palestinian people. And then that brings about another question. Do you think the way that the U.S. government has chosen to respond to this will put a target on the United States in reference to this particular conflict?
You mean a literal target? Like, will the U.S. be bombed over it?
Yeah, I'm just curious because I know the U.S. has been trying to find a reason to go to war with Iran for like forever, and they keep inching closer towards it. But I'm wondering, with a lot of the other countries coming together, particularly those that are part of BRICS, and with Putin going to the Middle East, I wonder if this is going to put a target on the U.S. because we're the ones supplying the weapons.
Well, we've had a target on it. And actually, speaking of a target, we've had a target on ourselves for a long time on the U.S. for creating war, creating the proxy war in Ukraine, etc., the destruction of Iraq, the destruction of Libya, the destruction of Syria, the assisted destruction of Yemen. But just to name a few. But in terms of Iran, I've heard from people that, Iranians as well, that understand the situation far better than I do, that Iran is not Iraq. Iraq had a weak military and was just far weaker than what Iran is. Iran is a large and powerful civilization and a strong military, even if they're not in the nuclear arms race. And while the U.S. is trying to find a reason for quote unquote war with Iran, they are finding reasons to harm Iran, such as the aggressive sanctions on Iran, which is economic war. But the U.S. doesn't actually want to go to war with Iran. If there were U.S. boots on the ground in Iran, it would be just a mess, far worse than Afghanistan, far worse than any of the dumb quagmires the U.S. has gotten ourselves into. And so the U.S. doesn't actually want war with Iran. They want to try, as with Russia, they want to try and crush these countries without actually going to war with them, without a full-on war with them. Because, a full-on war with Russia could result in the death of all humans around the planet. A full-on war with Iran could result in the death of, countless people, countless Americans, countless, probably all Israelis. Like, it's just so catastrophic that I think, as lunatic as the U.S. ruling establishment is, they do understand that. And so Iran is far more complicated than what we did in Iraq, which is disgusting and repulsive and killed millions of people. But anyway, in terms of Iran, that's kind of like an important point to make. But in terms of, you mentioned Saudi Arabia and Putin, the fact that these countries are really, you're seeing a shift away from the United States a situation where the United States has to approve all deals, peace deals, everything that happened around the world, because the United States was a single ruling power with hegemony. You're seeing a shift away from that, where China and Russia and Saudi Arabia are making these deals not just outside of America's control, but aggressively against what America wants. I mean, Saudi Arabia joining BRICS and Russia and China making oil deals that are no longer in the petrodollar system. These things are they just infuriate the ruling elite of the United States, but it shows the waning power of the U.S. empire. And if we are going to get to a world that actually has peace and doesn't have literally millions have been killed by the war on terror in 20 years. If we're to get to a world where there's peace and harmony and some kind of sustainability, then you do not want the U.S., the maniacal, sociopathic U.S. running things the way we have been.
All right, Lee, I have one more question for you, and that's in reference to two-state solution or one-state solution. There's now more talks again about a two-state solution. Kamala Harris gave a speech about this recently, saying that the Palestinian people need some right of self-determination and that they need to implement a two-state solution. This was after, I think, the push came from Barack Obama and an essay that he wrote first. Now you're hearing more politicians advocate for this. But Netanyahu has said that he does not want a two-state solution. What do you think will happen at the end of all of this? Do you think that the U.S. government and other Arab countries will push forth with a two-state solution? And do you think that Netanyahu would actually abide by it?
So the two-state solution, it sounds to me from the people I respect on this topic, is really kind of a canard. It's a fake idea to just get people to just try and negotiate forever, because Israel doesn't actually want a two-state solution. Even those in Israel who's in the Israel establishment who say they may outwardly say they do, because here's the thing: once you have a Palestinian state, that state is entitled to some things like a military, like and access to water, water rights, electricity right, like. Israel wants Gaza and the West Bank to be in a permanent state of concentration camp or open air prison. That is what Israel wants. And so when you hear these people say two-state solution, it seems to me, and it's been proven out over the past 30, 40 years, that it's really just a way to push people off so that you keep negotiating forever and nothing ever changes. So now, in terms of what the solution is, if I know that it's not an apartheid state. I know that it's not a settler colonial system coming in, kicking millions of people off their land, murdering 700,000 people. That was just during the first Nakba, which publicly some Israeli officials have called this the second Nakba. I know that's not the answer. I'll tell you that much. And this argument that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. Israel's not a democracy. If you have millions of people in an open air prison who can't vote in your system, not a democracy. Okay. So stop saying it.
All right, Lee, thank you so much. Where can people find you?
Yeah, I have it there on the screen. Linktree.com/Lee Camp will give them all my stuff. I do live streams 4 days a week at Rumble, and I have LeeCamp.com. I also have 3 podcasts, so people can look up. Anyway, all that's at on Linktree at Lee Camp, LeeCamp.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Lee.
Thanks a lot.
All right, guys. Lots of information there from Lee Camp, right? You guys should definitely check out. I'm pretty sure a lot of you watch Lee's show. If you don't, you should definitely check it out. Lee's also a comedian, so you can catch him on stage as well.